Read number 2, do the math. This is a formulation of my friend in Coven, Sib Robin Grimm, who himself is a very talented ritualist. In a coven of 7, we can each consult privately with the goddess for 5 minutes. 7 people times 5, 35 minutes. Do the math. However, with a ritual, with a group of 50 people, or with, God forbid, a group of 300, do the math. 50 times 5 minutes, how long is that? While each person is having their 5-minute conference while the goddess mouths at them in platitudes. You know how it usually goes. You wouldn't know they were a god if they didn't speak in platitudes. Huh? Too many cooks spoil the broth. A stitch in time saves 9. Yeah. Thanks very much, lady. For some reason, ritualists at festivals, we spend time and expense and energy to finally get the tribe together, to have pagans here in one space. There we are in the ritual grove, and you stand in line and wait for your 2 minutes to do something. For some reason, people think, everybody knows that in ritual you need to engage people. Everybody needs to be able to do something in ritual. And for some reason, we think that this is an effective way to do it. Well, I suspect that anybody here who's ever been to one of these rituals can tell you this is not an effective way to do it. Do the math. Paradigmatic example of this is at a festival that I was at many, many years ago. This ritual has gone down in local folklore as the long, boring cave ritual because it took place in a cave. Now, the premise of this ritual was actually very good. One of the, and yet again, another one of those differences between the old pagans and the new pagans, the ancestors had rituals of purification. And I don't just mean smudging and spritzing and those sorts of things. If you had done something that weighed on your conscience, if you had killed somebody accidentally and just could not get clean of it, there were places that you would go. You would go to a particular shrine, you would immerse yourself, you would fast, and then there would be, to this day, amongst Navajos, for instance, when you come back from a war, if you're in the army and you come back from the Middle East and you've killed people, you can't just walk back into society. You come back and your family puts on a purification ritual for you. And all the relatives show up and all the friends show up. And then the entire community itself cleanses you of what you have done. That was the premise that this ritual was attempting to address. And it was a good premise. But the execution of it, it was the ritual at which you approached Medusa and basically you confessed to her whatever it is that you want to confess and were absolved of it. Well, all right. However, it took about 5 minutes to confess to Medusa while you were there, and it just so happened that there were 150 people going to this ritual. So you went and you stood in line, and you stood, and you stood, and you stood, and you stood, and you stood. And at that point, I have to say, at that point, I was still too much engaged with Midwest politeness. At that point, I was still too much engaged with Midwest politeness to just do what I would do now, which is to say, vote with my hooves. And I have to say, this is something that I recommend to all of us. It's if the ritual is not speaking to you, if the ritual is boring, if for any reason you should not be at this ritual, you should get out. It's actually more polite to do so. Don't do it disruptively, do it as quietly and politely as you can, but get the flock out. Let's see, so there we were at the long boy. The ritual took 4 hours to do, and it was ghastly. The best comment that I heard afterwards was from my dear friend Bruder Soderbergh, whose comment was, what that ritual needed was 3 Medusas, no waiting. So here's another buzzword to remember, 3 Medusas, no waiting. I have heard a rumor, and I can't, so it is only a rumor. I do not know whether it is true. However, it certainly sounds like it could be true because this is how pagans do things. There is often that gap between the priesthood and the rest of us. in the course of a ritual. I was once in our area, Northern Dawn Council, a local council of, in my area, the Northern Dawn Council of Covenant of the Goddess puts on 4 quarterly rituals a year and has done this for going on 30 years now. One year they did the Samhain ritual. I couldn't be there. I think my coven was doing something that night. But the next day I was at an open house at one of the local witch stores, and so people were coming in. I talked with a couple of people who had been at the ritual. They all said, sort of the standard issue, pagan ritual, not really very interesting. I talked with a coven sib of mine who has a little bit more finely honed critical skill. She said, oh, it was actually kind of embarrassing. It was sort of like a Sunday school Christmas pageant. Then I ran into one of the organizers of the ritual who came to me with, I asked her how the ritual went, and she approached me with a rapt expression on her face and took my hand and squeezed it and said, "Oh, Steve, I've never been at a cog ritual before at which I literally felt the earth shake underneath my feet." I said, well, it sounds like it must have been a pretty localized tremor. This is one reason why we need critique for our rituals, my friends, because it feels different on the inside and on the outside. It does indeed, and I'll certainly come back to this later. But the rumor that I have heard about the 3 Medusas no waiting ritual is that of course, the ritual was such a massive disaster that everyone that attended it, including the people that put the ritual on, felt hugely embarrassed, and no one approached them. And no one told them that it had been a disaster. No, if there was something good that could be found to say about the ritual, people would say it to them. They just felt so bad about it. And so, the rumor that I have heard is that over the years among the ritual organizers, this disaster, this historic disaster, this shipwreck of a ritual has been turned into a grand artistic triumph in which people stood in line for 4 hours entirely wrapped in trance the entire time. Well, let me tell you, it wasn't like that at all, and it never is. Do the math.